what kind of health care we can have, bailing out the automobile industry and regulating the education standards, just a few examples of the federal government's hands overreach into things where it should not go.
Well, would the gentleman from Georgia yield for 1 moment?
I'll be glad to yield for 1 moment.
Thank you so much.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk 2 privileged reports from the Committee on Rules for the filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the titles of the resolutions.
Report to accompany House Resolution 218, resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1473, making appropriations for the Department of Defense and the other departments and agencies of the government for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2011, and for other purposes, providing for consideration of the concurrent resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 35, directing the Clerk of the House of Representatives to make a correction in the enrollment of H.R. 1473, and providing for consideration of the concurrent resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 36, directing the Clerk of the House of Representatives to make a correction in the enrollment of H.R. 1473. Report to accompany House Resolution 219, resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1217, to repeal the Prevention and Public Health Fund.
I thank the gentleman, and I yield back my time.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over time, it's become the norm for the federal government to keep expanding in both size and scope by absorbing powers and rights that were intended for the states and the people. In fact, in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, it says if a right is not specifically given to the federal government by the Constitution, in other words, these things that in Article 1, Section 8, as well as a few others, but these are the things we can pass laws about. If it's not prohibited from the states, then those rights are reserved for the states and the people. One of my primary goals while serving here in Washington is to send these powers back to the states and to the people, and to ensure that, do everything that I can to ensure that the Constitution is applied as the Founding Fathers intended. And I will work very hard to try to build those bridges, to send those powers back to the states and people. These are the powers created in Article 1, Section 8. The Necessary and Proper Clause, the so-called elastic clause, allows Congress to pass laws about these other things. But this is all the federal government, all the House and the Senate are supposed to be passing laws about. Now, we have some say in the courts, we have some say with the executive branch, but these are the things that Congress is supposed to be passing laws about, and nothing else. Nothing else but these things. Well, the General Welfare Clause is one of the most commonly abused and misapplied powers that the federal government has utilized to expand the size and scope of government and to destroy our liberty. Article 1, Section 8, Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Clause 1. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. This is the second place. I mentioned just a few minutes before. In the preamble, our Founding Fathers mentioned general welfare. Here it is, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the general welfare. This clause generated the most debate during our Founding Fathers period because the term general welfare is vague and leaves much room for interpretation. Now, we hear judges talk about interpreting the Constitution. Judges shouldn't be interpreting the Constitution. Words make a difference. And when we use the word interpreting, that means somebody can apply their own bias, their own judgment about what should and should not be constitutional. Well, you should be utilizing the word apply the Constitution in its original intent. And I'm an original intent constitutionalist, as I just mentioned. I want to apply the Constitution as our founding fathers meant it. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison famously disagreed about the meaning of general welfare and the limits to Congress's spending. Madison wanted the clause to be very narrowly interpreted, and Hamilton wanted a bit broader interpretation. Now, if Alexander Hamilton would walk into these doors of the U.S. House today, he would be absolutely shocked and chagrined at how much liberty we've lost, because he never, as a Federalist, envisioned the size and scope of government today. And I think if he knew what was going on today, a little over 200 years since the Constitution was passed, ratified, he'd be arguing just like I am today. Yet, the founders, as they later laid out in the Federalist Papers, neither Madison nor Hamilton would have agreed with the modern-day view that there are no limitations whatsoever on Congress's power to spend, and that general welfare means whatever Congress, the President, and the courts says that it means. Even the most ardent Federalists would not agree that we have an open invitation to have whatever kind of government that we want to have. Today, no project seems too local or too narrow, which is a big part of why this country is buried in so much debt. $14.5 trillion. And then if you look at the finance gap, it's over $200 trillion. The powers of Congress are not unlimited, which is why we must get back to the basics of the Constitution. And we're going to talk tonight about that original intent of the General Welfare Clause and highlight just how far we've moved away from it. Now, James Madison in Federalist number 41 in the Federalist Papers wrote this, quote, "Some who have not denied the necessity of the power of taxation have grounded a very fierce attack against the Constitution." Well, it sounds like to today, doesn't it? "On the language of which it is defined. It has been urged and echoed that the power, quote, to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States," unquote. We just showed you that. That's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution. As he goes on, "amounts to an unlimited commission to exercise every power which may be alleged to be necessary for the common defense or general welfare. No stronger proof could be given of the distress under which these writers labor for objections than their stooping to such a misconstruction." Now, that's that old kind of language. Basically, he was saying that it is inane to think that the General Welfare Clause, this clause, can allow the Congress to pass laws about anything, collect taxes, etc., for anything. No stronger proof could be given. Under the distress, that means under the problems that are going to arise, under which these writers labor. The Supreme Court today, the President today, the last President, Republican and Democratic presidents for the last many decades labor for objections, then they're stooping to such a misconstruction. He was very, very clear. We do not have the power to do so. We don't have the power to do so. James Madison, Federalist 45. "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined." They are defined. Article 1, Section 8, and other articles strictly interpreted, strictly defined, strictly according to what it says, not a broadening of those powers. Few and defined, to be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. James Madison in Federalist 45 is saying basically right here what the primary purpose of the federal government is. It's national defense, national security, foreign affairs. Also in the Constitution we have the rights to postal roads and post offices and things like that to establish a currency and other things to make this one nation. But the principal purposes of the federal government and the original intent of the Constitution is national defense, national security, and foreign affairs. The American people need to understand that firmly. That's foreign commerce. We see over and over again the courts defining general welfare in a different manner. Much different manner. In fact, the courts have held that anything that has to do with anybody's welfare, an individual's welfare, is okay under the Constitution. But that's not the original intent. The original intent was the general welfare of the nation, not welfare of individuals. We've developed this big welfare system in this country. It all started in earnest with President Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt just exploded the size and scope of government through his New Deal. Both progressives, both had socialist beliefs. In fact, Franklin Delano Roosevelt sent his advisors, his close held friends, his cabinet people to go visit with Stalin in communist Russia to study what he was doing, what Stalin was doing there, so that FDR could replicate it here in the United States. And he did everything that he possibly could to do so. He packed the courts because the courts originally said the welfare clause, the Commerce Clause, could not be expanded to include all this size and scope of government. Thomas Jefferson: Congress has not unlimited powers to provide for the general welfare, but only those specifically enumerated. Back to Article 1, Section 8. When my colleagues, Republican, Democrat alike, vote for things that are not enumerated in the original intent, they are violating their oath of office. Every single one of us have stood up here and have taken an oath of office. First time I did that was when I was sworn in the Marine Corps in 1964. When I came to Congress in a special election in 2007, then again in 2009, then again this year, I stood right here in this chamber and I held up my hand and I swore to uphold the Constitution against powers both foreign and domestic. One of the greatest domestic powers that are anti-Constitution reside right in this house. Right in this house. Because we're destroying our liberty. We're destroying it by the philosophy of big government. Jefferson said, quote, "They're not to do anything they please," unquote. 70 years ago, in a court case, United States versus Butler, we started moving into this loosey-goosey idea about the Constitution being anything that a court says that it is, anything that the President says it is, anything that the Congress says that it is. And we've seen just recently where Congress passed McCain-Feingold law now. President Bush said, we'll let the Supreme Court tell us whether it's constitutional or not. Well, the Supreme Court's not the final arbiter of what's constitutional. Neither is the President. Neither is Congress. We all have something to say about that, certainly. So do the states. We, the people, actually the final arbiter. We, the people, need to demand the original intent of the Constitution by becoming knowledgeable about it. The final arbiter of what's constitutional or not is what is in the Constitution and what our founding fathers said about it, not what some Supreme Court ruling has said about it, because most Supreme Court justices have no clue what the original intent is. Don't care. They just don't care, I don't think. United States versus Butler, 70 years ago, dismissed Madison's and Jefferson's narrow view of the Constitution, the original intent of the Constitution. And the Supreme Court held that the power to tax and spend is an independent power, and the General Welfare Clause gives Congress the power it might not derive elsewhere. Halvering versus Davis, the Supreme Court interpreted the clause even more expansively, conferring upon Congress a plenary power to impose taxes and to spend money for the general welfare, subject almost entirely to its own discretion, our own discretion. Even more recently, the Court has included the power to indirectly coerce the states into adopting national standards by threatening to withhold federal funds in South Dakota versus Dole. Today, the Hamiltonian view predominates in the application of the General Welfare Clause, which has led to the expansion of the government and to its $4.5 trillion debt. We spend up here without considering the repercussions. Obamacare is a great example. Obamacare is a destroyer. It's going to destroy jobs. It's going to destroy budgets, people's budgets, companies' budgets, cities' budgets, states' budgets, and the federal budget. And it's going to destroy the quality of health care. And we have no constitutional authority, as a judge in Florida upheld. James Madison, a little late on in his life, wrote a letter to James Robinson in 1831. And in this letter he said, with respect to the words general welfare in the Constitution, I have always regarded them as qualified by the detail of powers connected to them, connected with them. In other words, those things in Article 1, Section 8 and the rest of the Constitution, as it was intended, to take them in a literal and unlimited sense would be a metamorphosis of the Constitution into a character which there is a host of proofs was not contemplated by its creators, the creators of the Constitution, those folks who wrote it, those folks who ratified it. It's destroying America, destroying our economy, destroying everything that's been good in this nation. We need to cut our outrageous spending for the well-being of our nation and apply the General Welfare Clause as James Madison originally intended. It's got to stop. Mr. Speaker, when I come to the floor to vote, or when I write legislation, my staff and I write legislation, we have a four-way test that I apply to every vote I make and everything I do here. The first question is it right? And by that question I mean, is it morally right? Does it follow the Judeo-Christian biblical principles that this nation was founded upon? Now, a lot of liberals across this country who are watching this will start blogging, and some of the liberal news medias will say, I want to set up a theocracy here in America, and nothing could be further from the truth. Our founding fathers didn't want a theocracy either. Freedom of religion in the First Amendment is very dear to me. It's very dear to all of us. But we have freedom of religion in this country so that Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, humanists, and yes, even Christians can make a personal choice of what their religion is and can celebrate and worship in their religion as long as it doesn't infringe upon somebody else's rights, because this nation was founded upon biblical principles. Principles of freedom and liberty. We've gotten away from it. I believe so much in these 4 questions that I have them printed up. If somebody comes to my office, they'll see them on the desk of all of my legislative people in my office. There's a copy on my desk. It's on my home page of both of my websites. I wish every member of Congress would apply these 4 principles. Is it right? Is it constitutional in its original intent? Not this perverted idea of the Constitution that presidents, Congresses, and the federal court systems are operating under. Is it necessary, and can we afford it? 4 simple questions. You see, we've gotten away from the original intent of the Constitution. We've created this huge federal government that's taking our freedom away. It's killing our liberty in our nation. And it's because of a perverted idea of the General Welfare Clause, as well as the Commerce Clause and the Elastic Clause, that the courts have allowed this to happen, that presidents and Congresses have allowed it to happen. Mr. Speaker, we the people need to stand up and say no to taking our liberty away. Our founding fathers over and over again during the original period would rush to the floor with this book in hand, the Holy Bible. And they would come to the floor, the House and the Senate, go to the floor of the Constitutional Convention and say, look what I found, what our Creator says. Benjamin Franklin proposed prayer in the Constitutional Convention. We pray today, every day that Congress opens, because of that prayer that Benjamin Franklin recommended. And in his speech, and I encourage you to go read it, in that speech he said, if our Creator notices when a bird falls to the ground, how can we build a nation without the help of providence, of our God, our Creator? You see, the Constitution was written on biblical principles. In fact, our founding fathers quoted the Holy Bible more than any other source. David Barton has a ministry in Aledo, Texas, called Wall Builders. He has more original source documents than probably anybody. Wrote a book called Original Intent, The Courts, the Constitution, and Religion. I highly recommend this too. Wall Builders is a great resource of what the original intent is and what our founding fathers have said about the Constitution. But you see, back to something I mentioned about the Constitution. But you see, back to something I mentioned earlier. God says in Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I've heard that beginning line preached a number of times. Very seldom do I hear a pastor go past that A line. The whole verse says this. And remember, this is a promise from a holy, righteous God that can do nothing else but fulfill the promise. And His promise is this. When He spoke through Hosea to the Israelites, He speaks to us today. Our Creator says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being priests for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. And I get goosebumps and shivers every time I say that, literally. Because it's a promise from a holy, righteous God that can do nothing else but fulfill that promise. You see, the future of our nation depends upon we the people, the most powerful political force in this nation, becoming knowledgeable about the Constitution, getting a copy, looking at it online. My district people can come by my office and get a copy. We give them away by the hundreds out of my office here in Washington. Get a copy of the Federalist Papers, or if you don't want to read it in the old-style English, get the Federalist Papers in modern language. This document. Read what our Founding Fathers said about the Constitution. Read the Anti-Federalist Papers. Those are the guys who did not want a strong federal government. But you'll see in the Federalist Papers, those who are arguing for a strong central government, we have enumerated very limited and defined powers, as James Madison states, Thomas Jefferson states. Former U.S. Senator Everett Dirksen one time said, when he feels the heat, he sees the light. Members of Congress, in the House and the Senate, need to see the light by feeling the heat of we the people. You see, in Psalm 11, God asks a question. He says, if the foundations be destroyed, what are the righteous to do? But God's given us a free will. He's given us freedom. He's given us liberty. Unlike any society ever in history has ever said, ever seen, ever experienced. But we're losing it. And the only way we're going to put it back on the right course is for people to become knowledgeable about the foundational principles so that we can put this country back on a solid foundation so that it's not built on shifting sand, so that we can change the course of history. The direction we're heading today is going to destroy everything that's been good about this country. It's going to destroy our liberty. We're not going to have the freedom that we've enjoyed, even in the past few decades, which is much less freedom than they experienced in this country 100 years ago. Look at these questions. I think they're very reasonable. Is it right? Does it fit the Judeo-Christian principles that the nation was founded upon? Is it constitutional in its original intent? Not this perverted idea that we're operating on today. Do we need it, and can we afford it? If we went to these questions, we wouldn't have $14.5 trillion debt. We wouldn't have all the unfunded liabilities of the federal government, which are tremendous. We wouldn't have the loss of liberty and freedoms that we see going on here today. We wouldn't have a lot of the debates that we have here in Congress. We the people need to start holding every single member of Congress, every president, every public official, local, state, as well as federal, because they all take that same oath to defend the Constitution. The vast, vast majority are violating that oath. And the only way that we, the people, are going to change things, the only way we're going to put this country back on the right course is for we, the people, to demand it. So please contact your neighbors, your friends. Get them to read the Constitution, read the Federalist Papers, read what our Founding Fathers said about government. Understand how far we've gotten away from those original principles, how much we have lost our freedom, how much we've gotten away from liberty, and how close we are becoming a socialistic, communistic nation in this country. That's where we're headed. And the only way it's going to change is if the American people will stand up and demand something different, start throwing people out of office that violate their oath of office, and to put people in office that are going to stand firm for freedom, for liberty. I'm going to stand for the Constitution as it was intended. And I'm going to continue to fight for the Constitution as it was intended. There are precious few here in this body that will stand and even vote that way. The only way we're going to change it, the only way we're going to save America is for we, the people, to stand up and demand it. I believe we can. I believe we will. I believe that we're at the beginning, right now today, of a new dawn in America, a dawn of liberty, a dawn of freedom, a dawn of limited government, a dawn of strong national defense and national security, a dawn where our children and grandchildren are going to grow up in an economically prosperous nation where there are going to be jobs in the private sector, where people are going to be able to operate within their society without all the constraints of government. We've got to demand it. The future of this country depends upon it. Your children and your grandchildren depend upon it. Join in the fight. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Yarmouth, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor to be here on the floor of the House of Representatives talking to the American people about one of the most critical things that this body does, and that's to decide how much money we ask our citizens to contribute to the government and how that money is going to be spent. And you know, I didn't come here intending to respond to the gentleman who spoke before me, but he cast, in one respect, the whole debate over our budget very well when we had Mr. Brown's four-way test. And the first thing that Mr. Brown put on there is it right and moral? And I agree with him. Because when we debate the budget of the United States, when we debate how we're going to spend the taxpayers' money, the first question we should ask is it right and is it moral? And the converse is, if we don't spend something, is it wrong and is it immoral? Today, I had the great honor of visiting Walter Reed Hospital. And there, I got to speak with several of our extremely brave, courageous soldiers who have been injured in battle. And one young man who lost both legs, one just above the knee, one all the way to his pelvis, and lost a little bit, a finger on one hand, was on what can only be described as bionic legs, which he said are extremely good. The technology is extremely advanced, but they still don't help him walk. And he talked to us for a long time about what he had been through, the progress he had made, and what he hoped to achieve with technology. And his parting comment to us was, you know, this is the result of the federal government spending money on medical research. This is helping people not just in the military, not just in the armed forces, but also in the private arena as well. And I look at what the Republican budget that we will consider later in the week has done, and it slashes money for medical research. And I say, let's apply Mr. Brown's four-way test. Is it right? Is it moral? Also, does it make any sense to cut medical research when we have brave men and women who are reacquiring some of their lives after making incredible sacrifices because of the money that we have spent, the taxpayer money we have spent funding critical research? It would be immoral to deny, Don was his name, to deny Don his request that we continue to fund medical research that's going to help him regain his capabilities, his physical function, and the thousands of young men and women who have sacrificed so much for us. So, as we enter this debate this week on the Republican budget proposal, the Democratic alternative budget proposal, we have choices to make. That's always what government is about. It's about choosing. How do we spend the taxpayer money that we asked our taxpayers to contribute to the general welfare of this country? Last week, we sat in the Budget Committee and considered the Republican budget. And I'm sure that my characterization of the Republican budget will be different than the Republicans' characterization of their budget. But I will say one thing, that we all agree that we have a fiscal challenge in front of us. We have enormous deficits. We can argue about how we got here. I'm not going to spend time debating that tonight. But we clearly have a challenge, and the future is even more challenging. So the question is, as we approach this budget deficit, this future of deficits, a very, very large national debt, what's the best way to approach it? Now, the Republican answer is that there is only one side of the ledger. Now, most homes, most businesses have two sides to the ledger. They have an income side and they have an expenditure side. As far as the Republicans on the Budget Committee are concerned, we only have an expenditure side. You've heard the Speaker of the House say we only have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. You've heard my senior senator from Kentucky, the minority leader of the Senate, say we don't have a taxing problem, a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Well, in fact, if you look at our situation right now, we're no different in a lot of respects than the average household or the average business. If we have a challenge, a financial challenge, we do a couple things. We say, okay, where can we cut costs? And then we say, how can we generate more revenue? Those are the two options. As far as the Republicans are concerned, there's only one option. It's cut expenditures. And unfortunately, my characterization, they cut it on the programs which help the most vulnerable people in our country. On the other hand, what did they do on the revenue side? They say, well, let's see, millionaires and billionaires haven't done quite well enough over the last decade or so. You know, 20 years ago, they only earned 9% of all income in the country. Now they earn 35% of all income in the country. That's not quite good enough. Let's give them another tax break. The Bush tax cuts were okay, but they weren't quite large enough. So instead of cutting their rate from 39.6 to 35%, let's cut their maximum rate to 25%. And let's see what that does for the economy. Well, I think most of my Democratic colleagues would agree that if we're going to approach this deficit and the national debt in a responsible way, we will look on both sides of the ledger. We will ask people who have done extremely well, who have the capacity to give more, to pay a little more, and we will make responsible cuts that are balanced across the sector. But there are so many ramifications to this debate, and we're going to be debating it all week. And I'm proud to have with me today to help me discuss this some members of the Budget Committee from the Democratic side. It's my great honor now to yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Representative Yarmuth, and thank you for leading us in this discussion. It's rather interesting to hear you, with your introductory comments, speak of the approach to one side of the ledger. But what has been advertised out there, what has been messaged, is that what we have are these cuts that translate into savings. So we're going to save at the expense of the middle class, but we're going to cut programs for seniors, for veterans, for children, for working families, for small businesses, and you know, that will produce savings. This propensity for tens of billions of dollars worth of cuts, $100 billion worth of cuts, an insatiable thirst for cutting domestic programs that really provide for the dignity factor for many families, provide for job creation and retention. We saw what happened when we invested in job creation, and we've gained over 2 million private sector jobs in just over the last year. So we know that those investments oftentimes will lead to lucrative dividends. They will relate to programs that are required for our working families, our middle-class Americans across this great country, and also it provides for an opportunity for job creation that produces the sort of mix, that down payment, the priming of the pump, if you will, that makes it all happen. So, Representative Yarmuth, you're correct in talking about this as a one-sided approach, but what troubles me is that there's this messaging effort underway that would try and convince the American public that it's producing savings. But where do those savings go? There's trillions of dollars of cuts to the middle class in this Republican plan, and those trillions of dollars of cuts that they deem savings are then that fuel that provides the resources to cut, you know, the trillions of dollars worth of millionaire, billionaire tax cuts, to provide for the continuation of services that contractors will provide that have been deemed wasteful or at times fraudulent with the Pentagon. They'll continue to protect those investments. They will allow for additional relief for corporations. So it's sliding dollars out of the pockets of the middle class and investing them, the spending that they do, as they accrue those savings. The new spending that they do is tax cut delivery for those on the upper echelon. And to me, it sounds very much like the pre-recession situation under the President Bush administration, which led us to this deep and very painful and long-term recession. You know, their plan has been dubbed by themselves, by their own members, as the path to prosperity. I would suggest it's a road to ruin for the middle class, and it's a road to riches that paves the streets with golden opportunities for those who are the most comfortable in society, those deemed on top of the perch. This is a very interesting scenario that's being placed before this body and all of Congress, for that matter, and we need to put it under the microscope, and we need to message to America what is happening. You take from the poor and the middle class, you slide it over to the most comfortable, to corporations, millionaires, billionaires, oil company handouts, mindless handouts. That's how they pay for those, by sliding that cash down that slippery slope and investing it in tax cuts, spending on tax cuts for those, as you indicated, just didn't get quite enough under the Bush tax cuts. And in a while, too, I want to go toward the Medicare situation. They want to end Medicare with this budget. I want to talk about that after we hear from some of our other colleagues, but this is an interesting scenario. Road to ruin, road to riches. It's a complete separation, a dichotomy of special needs out there coming at the expense of middle-class America. It's a raid on our middle class. It's paving the road to riches for the very fortunate, and it's creating the road to ruin for America's middle class. Without a strong middle class, without enhancing the purchasing power of our middle class, we have a weakened America. That's easy enough to prove through history. So thank you again, Representative Yarmuth, for bringing us together on a very important discussion here in the House of Representatives as we continue to fight for the middle class that has been impacted severely and would take even more hits if this budget were allowed to pass through.
I thank the gentleman, and he mentioned the road to ruin, and it's also a road we've been down before.
Absolutely.
It is a road we've been down before. Back under the Reagan administration, this whole magical economic theory of trickle-down economics was developed. And the idea was you let people at the top make as much as they possibly can, do as well as they possibly can, and that will trickle down and help everybody else. And the man who was largely responsible for that policy under the Reagan administration, David Stockman, who was his budget director, he said just last year, "I find it unconscionable that the Republican leadership, faced with a $1.5 trillion deficit, could possibly believe that good public policy is to maintain tax cuts for the top 2%. That was last year when we were actually debating whether to return to the Clinton-era tax rates. The Clinton era, by the way, which resulted in one of the most impressive decades of job growth in this country. Now they even want to double down on that. They not only want to not just don't want to go back to the Clinton-era tax cuts, they want to cut it even further. And their theory is that by cutting the tax rate by 10% more on the wealthiest people in this country, that they'll create more jobs. Where do they get this stuff? Well, the only source they have for that theory is the Heritage Foundation. Now, the Heritage Foundation was also the group that said that if we cut taxes in the Bush administration, that we're going to have this enormous job growth and this enormous surplus. Didn't quite work out so well. But they're saying now, this is what I call the Harry Potter budget. You may wave your magic wand and you make anything sound like it's true. Cut taxes further on the rich, slash spending to help the low and moderate income people in this country, and the economy will bloom. Well, I'm not buying it. I don't think most Americans will buy it. But again, it's a road we've been down before, so we have some evidence. And at this point, I'd like to introduce and yield time to a great new member of Congress and also the Budget Committee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bass.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Yarmuth, for your leadership in this effort. You know, as a new member on the Budget Committee, we had an interesting week last week. We really just completed a week where we saw the far right of the Republican Party take their party off the ledge and way out of the mainstream. They've declared war on seniors, on the disabled, on sick, on the children, and on the underserved by proposing to end Medicare and Medicaid as we know it. They've championed a budget entitled The Path to Prosperity. This is a plan that simultaneously ends Medicare while giving billions in tax breaks to big oil and the wealthiest Americans. Mr. Tonko called it the path to ruin. I thought about the Ryan to Ruin plan. It generously gives senior citizens a gift, and that gift is a voucher to purchase health care. The senior citizen then has to identify an insurance carrier that will take the voucher, and if the person is lucky, the voucher will cover all the costs. I do think that this would be rare. And I don't know what happens in this plan if after a couple of years or a couple of illnesses, the insurance company decides to drop the person or raise the rates. You know, under the Affordable Care Act, of course, they couldn't do that. But if the Ryan plan does what he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, so all of that would come back into play. The person would have to pick up the rest of the costs under the Ryan plan. Now, I believe that we are simply foolish, and we're fooling ourselves if we think all seniors will be able to just write a check and pay the difference. That's what's said. They'll just pay the difference. They'll just have to absorb more cost. A more likely scenario is that seniors will simply not have medical coverage, and we will be sent back in time to when seniors did not have coverage because insurance companies didn't want to cover them. I often say to people that you can judge a society by how it treats its elderly and its children. The Path to Ruin plan hurts both populations. You know, what I wanted to do today was to share a story, but just take for a moment a little bit about the Ryan plan. When it takes effect in 22, that's only 11 years from now, the average senior would receive an $8,000 voucher to buy insurance. So what I wanted to share with you was the years that I spent working in the emergency room. I worked in Los Angeles County, USC, one of the largest emergency rooms in the United States. And the emergency room is so large, it's divided into different sections. And so one section that I spent a couple of years working in is called ambulatory care. We used to call it the walking wounded, because frankly, the people that came to that section of the emergency room shouldn't have even been in an emergency room. But the reason why they were there was because they didn't have health insurance. They didn't have access to care. And what typically happens is that if you don't have access to care, by the time you eventually see someone, you are much sicker than you would have been. So I remember a case where a diabetic patient who was not 65 and therefore he couldn't access Medicare, he came into the walking wounded area or the ambulatory care area with a sore on the heel of his foot. He had tried a series of, he told me in the history that he was a diabetic, but he had tried a series of home remedies and he finally came to the ER when his heel started turning purple. Well, as I interviewed the patient and I asked about his medical history, he told me that he had been diagnosed with diabetes years ago, but he couldn't afford his medication. So he was trying to watch his diet and do the best he could. Well, for those of you that don't know, a patient with a history of poorly controlled diabetes who presents to an emergency room is likely to have a series of complications. Well, this man ended up as an amputee because the sore on his heel that he didn't realize had developed into gangrene, and that's why his foot was turning colors. So just thinking about the cost of this, the total cost of this visit was $12,000 and his leg. That bill included $2,000 charge for his emergency room visit and lab tests, $6,000 charge for an amputation, and a daily charge of $1,400 for aftercare. If this patient had had access to routine preventive care, he would still have his leg, and $12,000 would be saved. So why do I share this story with you? Well, we're fooling ourselves if we don't understand that turning Medicare into a voucher and leaving seniors to fend for themselves is simply denying adequate health care, that in the end will cost us so much more in suffering and in hospital costs that will ultimately be borne by taxpayers. Today in my office, I met with representatives from several hospitals who were describing the challenges that they face now. So there's an area of Los Angeles County where 600,000 people live, and the last time I checked, that was around the entire population of the state of Vermont. 600,000 people, where there is not one trauma center, there is not one emergency room, because all of the 4 hospitals in that area have closed. Now that's today. Under the Ryan plan for seniors, vouchers for seniors and vouchers for states, because that's the bottom line as to what a block grant is. It's a voucher. Instead of a voucher for an individual, it's a voucher for a state. The hospitals they represent that all border this area that has no trauma center in it and has no emergency room and has no hospital because they're all closed up, they would essentially have to absorb, and they have been absorbing, the population, these 600,000 people. So they were concerned, and they came into my office today concerned that they could potentially face closure now, given the situation. If we were to adopt the Ryan plan, the pathway to ruin, however you want to describe it, I think we would be setting the stage for hospital closures to continue, for more patients to come into the walking wounded area of emergency rooms, for there to be more amputations, for people to be sicker and eventually come to the emergency room, which is so incredibly short-sighted because in the end it winds up costing taxpayers so much more money because these people are going to be cared for. So we are fooling ourselves if we think that seniors are just going to be able to meet what the voucher doesn't cover. Thank you very much for your leadership in this, and I yield my time back to Mr. Yarmouth.
I thank the gentlelady for her contribution and for her work on the Budget Committee. And I know somewhere toward the end there we talked, the gentlelady mentioned jobs, and this is something that is kind of at the core of what we're trying to work toward. We're trying to find a budget, develop a budget that will stimulate the economy, that will create jobs, and We know that under the Ryan budget, again, according to the Heritage Foundation, the way they get to some kind of physical sanity is they project that unemployment in the country will be reduced to 2.8% by 2016. Now, I don't know any reputable economists in the country who thinks that's feasible, particularly when you're slashing a lot of government spending that does create jobs, particularly in the healthcare arena. But no one has been more vocal and more knowledgeable and more articulate about what it takes in this country to create jobs than Mr. Garamendi from California, and I welcome him to the discussion and yield to him now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yarmuth. And for the members of the Budget Committee, you've had a steep and difficult job as the Republicans have attempted simply to ram down the throats of this Congress a really unacceptable budget, one that does destroy opportunities. I would love to talk about Make It in America, and I will in a moment, but I was just listening to my colleague from California, and she raised the issue of the medical care here in the United States. It was 1964 that the United States set out on a very, very important mission, and that was to provide health care to seniors. Prior to that time, and I know from my own county, where I grew up in Calaveras County, if you became a senior, you were destined for a very, very rough road. There was literally no insurance available for you, and there was no opportunity for you to get yourself out of poverty unless you happened to be among the wealthy. It was a terrible situation. So during the Lyndon Johnson period, 1964, they created a program called Medicare. Medicare, so that when you became 65, you had an opportunity to get a solid health care program available to you. A doctor program, a hospital program. You had to pay a little bit for the hospital program, but it was guaranteed available to you, and every American 65 and over had that policy. Here we are, 40-some years later, and what's taking place? Our Republican colleagues are determined to terminate, kill, stop, eliminate Medicare. They do it in a subtle way. They do it in a subtle way. But I want everyone to know that this year, if the Republican budget goes forward, this will be the tombstone for Medicare. Medicare, 1965 to 2011. Created by Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, destroyed by the GOP. How do they do it? They do it by saying everyone that is 55 years old today will never get Medicare. It's over. And for those that are on Medicare, their lives will move on, and eventually they will be gone also. And Medicare dies with this budget. This is a central part of the American promise to every senior, and the Republicans are determined to terminate Medicare and put a tombstone, dated this year, 2011. You'll get a voucher, but as my colleague from Los Angeles so eloquently said, that voucher will be worth very little when the time comes, and you'll be thrown to the insurance sharks. I understand insurance. I was the insurance commissioner in California for 8 years, and I know what the health insurance companies want to do. They want to make sure that they insure somebody that will never get sick. Pre-existing conditions, raise the rates, change the benefits, increase the co-pays and the deductibles, all of that. So the future population of seniors in just 10 years will be thrown to the wolves, and they'll be at the mercy of the health insurance companies. We cannot let that happen. This is a fight for the very nature of America. This is a fight not only to protect seniors, but to protect those who want to become seniors. I want to know what American out there today does not want to live long enough to get to Medicare. They know that today, because of the Democratic Congress, they have an opportunity to get insurance with the Health Care Reform Act. But they know that the Republicans want to take that away, too. The very first piece of legislation that the new Republican Congress passed was the repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act. This is step 2, to dismantle. Now, I'm going to take another 30 seconds and turn it back to my colleagues on the budget side. But here's what we must do. We must get to the root cause of the underlying inflation in health care. Terminating Medicare does not stop health care inflation. What could stop it are the kind of reports and the kind of suggestions that I made 5 years ago when I wrote this document called Priced Out. 43 separate things that we can do, specifically for California, but it's applicable for America. 43 separate things that we can do to bring down the cost of medical care. It turns out that about a dozen of those were in the Affordable Health Care Act. Very specific things to rein in the cost of medical care. 2 examples. 1, hospital infections. Not only deadly, but costly. Now, every hospital in the United States is forced by the Affordable Health Care Act to pay attention to hospital infections. It's probable that one of our colleagues, who was with us here in this House last year, died as a result of a hospital infection just last week. This is serious stuff. It's in the Affordable Health Care Act. Hospitals would be penalized. Secondly, electronic medical records, so that the mistakes are eliminated. Let me turn this back to you, Mr. Yarmuth and Mr. Tonko. You on the Budget Committee have served so well, so hard, fighting the initial battle to protect America's seniors and to protect this nation's future. Thank you for